Welcome to Grow Smarter, brought to you by Toby Marketing and Media. As a founder, you know the pressure of making every marketing dollar count. My mission at Toby Agency is to help healthcare and wellness entrepreneurs have more confidence in their marketing and media investments. So welcome back to the show. If you heard our first conversation with Julia Kim, you know that her mission is one of the most compelling stories in modern wellness, creating a physician-developed Sanu model to fill the massive support gap in U.S. maternal healthcare. We talked about the Korean wave and the incredible consumer demand for services that prioritize health and recovery over the unrealistic expectation of an immediate bounce back. But identifying a great market is only half the battle. The real challenge for any ambitious founder, whether you're in functional medicine, aesthetics, or specialty wellness, is the blueprint for scale. How do you go from a single, high-touch location to a successful business without your systems breaking down? And how do you maintain a premium experience while managing rising operational costs and the complexities of 24/7 care? Today, we're going to dive a little bit more into the how. The operational and marketing strategies Julia used to build the foundational systems that allow the Sanu concept to become the leading standard in postpartum care. So Julia, welcome back to the show. Great to have you here. I didn't scare you off on the first one, so that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, no, I love talking about this stuff.
Cool. So I think let's just get straight to it. I wanted to kind of dive into this idea of operationalizing this new vision for sort of like postpartum care, right? And in the first episode that we talked, you kind of had to pioneer a lot of stuff, right? A lot of new systems that maybe there wasn't an SOP for. And when I say SOP, I mean standard operating procedure. I'm already like using jargon, sorry. But in scaling this kind of high-touch 24/7 model, what would you say were the top 2 or 3 standard operating procedures or SOPs that you knew you had to develop from the very beginning?
Yeah, so two that immediately come to mind, we call it charting in the industry. Any kind of clinical provider who you go to see will be charting while you're not looking. And it just means them taking down the notes, making sure that your codes for the services that you were provided are properly recorded so that you can, or your provider can, be reimbursed through insurance. For us, we're a small outfit. We're a small mom and pop shop, and we definitely did not have the funds to access any kind of charting software. And plus, the way that we quote unquote chart is different because by and large, insurance companies and insurance plans don't cover the type of service that we offer, at least not wholesale. So while they might cover postpartum doula care or lactation services, they don't cover retreat care. But we still needed to take notes and be really mindful of what happened during a person's day. And beyond that, not just ad hoc care when you need it or as you need it. We actually provide a curriculum. So you're coming in with almost an agenda or an itinerary that takes you through your stay. And if you don't have something like that pre-planned, you're actually going to either end up doing a lot of work, way more work than you did on one client, than you did on your others, or not enough. And so the experience isn't consistent across all of your clientele. And so we actually built a charting system from scratch. And today we still use that Google Drive, Google spreadsheet system to do all of our charting, track all of our billing, all of the customized care plan pieces, even inventory. And we're just super pleased with what we built.
That's really interesting. I want to stick a pin in that really quick because I think sometimes, and when you start investing in systems, I see kind of like 2 approaches to it. One is like, we need the best. I don't care how much it costs. I know I don't want to spend this much, but I need it to make my practice run. And then you have the other DIYers who are like, I don't have the money to spend on that right now, and I don't have any patience, right? And I think what you just identified is that like maybe it's better to DIY and kind of keep it simple to like a system like a spreadsheet, right? And the beauty of spreadsheets these days, especially with AI, if you structure that spreadsheet correctly, you can actually do other things with it later that maybe you wouldn't have thought about with AI tools and analyzing data and whatnot. But I think a trap that a lot of people get stuck in is like, oh, I need this system, I need that system. And sometimes they even get paralyzed. They don't make a decision because they're like, I need this system, but I don't want to spend the money.
Yeah.
Right. And I think if you're in that boat, if you're in the Julia boat, right, you go and build your own boat, right? Basically. And so don't be afraid to do that. And again, I think the advice out there to any healthcare and wellness entrepreneurs that might be doing a similar thing like that Julia had to do, which is use ChatGPT to give you instructions on how to build that charting system or that workflow or whatever. You'll be shocked at how well it knows like the inside of that industry. And you can tell it things like, I don't want to buy this tool, but I want to get 80% of the functionality of the tool. How can I do this in a spreadsheet? And you'll be shocked at how well GPT can actually help you plan those things out. So yeah, sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to note that because too many people get stuck on like trying to buy systems that they think they need, but actually have no idea what it does, you know?
Yeah, we did end up looking at a lot of systems for things like our sales funnel, our marketing slash sales funnel.
Yep.
We looked at HubSpot, which looked
Yep.
great, right? But it's super expensive. And so another system that we created from scratch is our tracking system for sales. So,
Oh,
when
cool.
we get an inbound inquiry, where is that inquiry coming from? Who's doing the responding and with what? How many days out? Exactly what are you saying? And when are you supposed to get back to them? And again, to this day, we still use our Google Sheet homemade tracking system. I think at some point we will want to switch over to something a little bit more sophisticated. But I think one of the things that I noticed early on was that a lot of these systems where they had a freemium feature or, their pay as you go or what have you, they offered way too much. And there were things that they didn't track that we needed it to track. So we just built our own. Hopefully one day we'll go over to HubSpot or something nice. But for now, this is what's working for us. And so we built that. And initially, we also built a shift tracking system as well. And that is
Fascinating. Yeah.
basically like, we're in medical or clinical adjacent care, and all of our care staff work in shifts. And
Yep.
we have to assign them those shifts. And so we were looking at restaurant software, like restaurant
Oh,
shifts,
fascinating. Oh,
medical shift
interesting.
software,
Yeah.
and a lot of them were good and fine. But again, we made our own. That one, fortunately, we moved over to Homebase,
Okay.
and it's been working really great for us.
Awesome. Yeah, and another thing about you having to build your system on your own is that it forces you to understand your workflow, right? It forces you to understand what data you have to collect. When you buy these out of the box systems, it's kind of like a predefined workflow for you. And so you kind of have to shoehorn the way you do things into it. Hey, that works great if you buy a functional medicine EMR and you're a functional medicine clinic. But if you're a postpartum recovery center, like that's not going to be a matching business process one to one, right? And so if you have something that's unique, it might behoove you to actually build it on your own, right? Because not only for the money part, but also you might actually get a better solution, right?
Yeah. I mean, there are really great solutions out there, but again, our industry was brand new. And so we had to make it on our own. And, we're still using a lot of that stuff. So it worked for
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. How have your standard operating procedures maybe evolved, since you started? I think one of the challenges with SOPs is writing them once, but keeping them updated as you're building the airplane while flying it? So like, did you see yourself updating the SOPs or having to create new ones, or did you find yourself having a good process for that?
I mean, we're always iterating on all of our
Yeah.
SOPs. And, I think that's just the nature of running a business. As you're chugging along, I think you notice little inefficiencies, or you notice that a few members of your staff continuously make the same mistakes, or you make the same mistakes continuously. And you're like, how
Yep.
do we fix this? It's not them, it's the system. And
Yep.
so we're constantly iterating on it. And one of the things that I hate doing, and in fact, I have to go back and do it now, is mapping of those
So-
processes. And it's very business school like,
yeah.
Kanban and the
Yep.
shapes, and what
Yep.
moves you from point A to point B, and what are the decision points. And
Yeah. Process
again,
mapping.
another
Yep.
thing that helps you understand your processes inside and out.
I will say, like, my first job out of school, I worked in consulting, and I think one of the most powerful skills that I learned was process mapping. And I remember my manager, her name was Amy Patterson. So Amy, if you're out there anywhere, she was like the senior manager on the engagement at the time. And she sat me down. I was like 21, 22 years old, and sat me down. I was like, Andrew, I'm going to teach you the most important skill you're ever going to learn in your career. And I'm like, oh, this is ladies, whatever, right? And sure enough, it ended up being the thing that I taught my brother, that I taught a bunch of people in my company. And I think if you're an entrepreneur, and process, and what Julia is referring to is like process diagramming, process engineering. Sometimes it can be referred to business process re-engineering. And it's this idea of like laying out in a visual kind of diagram, like the steps of a process, like the patient fills out the form. Did they answer all the questions? Yes or no? If they answered it yes, go here. If they answered it no, go here, right? And so it defines the logic kind of like in your workflow. And if you are trying to map out like a pre-patient workflow or a follow-up workflow, literally like even taking out a piece of paper and drawing like box by box, like what the process is, can really make it a lot easier for you, especially if when you visually kind of lay it out. So good to know that process mapping is a tool that all entrepreneurs have to use.
Yeah. I mean, if you need to teach the process to somebody else, or if you step away from doing that task for some time, and as an entrepreneur, you have so many things in your mind. I mean, I forget things all the time. And I was like, oh, how do we do that again? And so you just go back to your map.
Yeah, and also a lot of practices I speak to, they want to hire virtual assistants. They might want to hire like an offshore marketer or an offshore operations or data entry person. It will make it a ton easier to onboard that offshore resource if you've got some standard operating procedures. And in fact, I feel like a lot of I've worked with offshore folks in the Philippines, in India, in various places in South America. And it's interesting because I talk to business owners, and I think we're at a place now where most business owners see the value of offshoring, but there's still the ones that are like, they didn't do a great job for me. And, I asked them like, so how did you onboard them? Did you just kind of throw them a life vest and expect them to figure out? And inevitably, every single time that they don't have an SOP for them to go read and follow, they always say, oh, like offshore talent is terrible, which is not right. Like you didn't set your company up right to allow the benefits that you would get from an offshore person. So if you're going to think about adding virtual or offshore staff to you, I would actually say the things that Julie has done that's another reason why it's so important to develop a lot of these like core standard operating procedures. Did you ever hire anyone offshore or use a VA or anything like that,
I
Julia? You
did.
did? Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
Marlo from the Philippines, and he was amazing. And
Yeah.
he just, he did everything wonderfully. And those process maps really saved me from spending a whole lot of time training
Yep.
him.
Yep.
And I actually think these days there's software, or
Mhm.
like a Rippling or HR software that can do a lot of that for you. So not only do
Yep.
you get the process maps, but you have the hierarchy maps.
Yep.
You just have all the things that you need. The handbook, right?
Yep.
Like, oh my gosh, you update the process map, and then you have to update the handbook, and then you have to update the training slides. And it's like,
Yep.
yeah, I hate that stuff.
It's
But
a lot. And I think identifying those core SOPs to start with, right? That's the key. And staying focused on those and making sure that as long as those are documented, you're inevitably going to scale, and you're going to need to bring on people, and you're going to need to train people, right? So SOPs are important. They're the most probably boring thing. I think I saw There was a tool out there where you could kind of dictate to it like what the process was, and it would spit out like the narrative and the process map and all that stuff. So it's much easier. You're not don't have to sit there literally typing out the process anymore. The AI tools can do a lot of this for you. Um, kind of pivoting to the next question. Um, you're creating a new category of service here, right? And so not only do you have to educate the consumer about what this is, right? But in a lot of ways, you need to structure your team, your staff, build culture, right, around this new idea of a service, right? Um, how did you initially kind of structure and staff your team? And did you have any like internal kind of like mission statements or company values that you wanted to impress that you would only speak to this initial group of people on? So two questions is how'd you structure the team? And then how'd you build the culture with the team in the beginning? What kind of culture were you trying to convey to them?
Yeah. So initially, our team looked way different than what it looks like today. I think we
Yeah.
overstaffed, and I see
Yep.
that all the time. I'm actually working with a new partner to expand the business, and
Yep.
I'm looking at his financial model. And in that financial model, there are lines for a whole bunch of staff where I'm like, this is going to look way different 6 months after we launch.
Yep.
And so, I fell into that same bucket. But for me, it was super important because we're in a care and service business and not a medical service business, that our
Yep.
hospitality and our customer service was amazing. And a lot of that has to do with how your relationships are, your interpersonal relationships are with each other. So, like, the staff and the admin. And so culture was and still is super important. And so I like to emphasize the fact that we hire from within. We really appreciate all of our employees.
Yeah.
We respect one another to the utmost degree. You leave your attitudes and things at the door. And we're here to help each other if there's any way that we can help you in any way. So let's say that working with Sanu is just a stepping stone somewhere else,
Hmm.
or, you're just doing this temporarily.
Yep.
Can we make introductions for you? Is there a certain type of experience that you need to pad your resume? Can we help you get there? And so we're always watching out for each other and trying to go the extra mile. And I think um, doing that with each other on the staff side really comes out when you're interacting with clients on the client facing side.
Yeah, we talked in the last episode about like you had to hire people who came from hospitals and like more like call it sterile environments, right? Like where maybe the bedside manner is not as important or and you're moving more into like you mentioned before, you're moving into a hospitality model. Um how did you actually recruit to find these people to start with? Right? Like, did you go to Indeed and put a job post up? Did you work through your network? Like, what did you do?
So we did. We did
Yeah.
initially go to Indeed, but I guess surprisingly, because I never thought that this would happen, but employees would say, "Hey, I have a sister or a former
Mm.
coworker or somebody I know who's looking for a position and they would be really great for this role." And so we're constantly taking interviews. And also, we are constantly fielding just cold resume submissions on our
Oh,
website.
fascinating. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
so there's never a shortage of care people. And I think these days, as more people are starting to talk about the gap in postpartum care, and just the importance of how we're looking after our mothers, there are more and more people getting into this line of work. And thank goodness for organizations like DONA, who is a training and certifying organization for doulas, and a lot of other great organizations that they are consistently churning out a really great group of care professionals. But I think, not being on your own, because so many times care professionals, they're on their own, especially in the postpartum line of work. They're their own
Right.
bosses, and there's so much admin and HR and all the things involved, and you're out there just kind of swimming in your own sea.
It's like
Whereas,
the
yeah,
one-off doula or the night nanny, and she's her he or she is their own business,
Right.
basically, right?
It's
The
tough.
solopreneur. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Um, so tell me, like, when you first started, you were looking for that first group of people. What's the difference between what you were looking for, either in their resume or how they interviewed and their personality when you first started, versus what you look for now with more experience and, being able to, uh, do the BS test, right? And smell BS like from a mile away. What's that difference you sort of see from the early days to like where you are now with more experience and more foresight?
Yeah, and I think this goes across all industries, but the through line is someone who's able to communicate well. And so
Mm,
if you cannot get your thoughts out, or if you're extremely hyper on the call, I mean, I interviewed one woman who was just so kind and she had an amazing energy, but
yeah.
it wasn't a calming energy. And I just
Right.
thought, oh, you know what? As much as I appreciate you for who you are, it's just not right for
Fascinating.
us. And so being a good communicator is first and foremost. And, being an adult, being mature, and those are things that are really hard to suss out in an interview.
I
Um,
know. I mean,
yeah.
there's been times where you interview like, wait, where the F did this person come from? Right?
I
Like,
know. Like, and you hire them and they come in and work for you, and then they just act so bizarrely. And you're like, whoa, I never picked that up from their resume. And I also didn't pick it up at all from their interviews. So where is this
yeah,
coming from? And so sometimes it's a hit or miss. That's the hard thing about working with people and not, machines, but you never get better service than you do from human interaction. So,
fair enough. Yeah. I had to hire someone to like run Facebook ads and things like that. And as part of the interview process, we had them do a practical, hey, here's a campaign, build a report on the results. And this is before the AI stuff, right? Or it was the very beginnings of the AI where it could do some stuff for you, but it wasn't that good. So this person sends in the homework and, oh, this is great, interviewed great, awesome, let's hire them. Ask them to build their first report. They didn't know how to do it. They're like, oh yeah, where do I get the data? I'm like, what did you expect we were going to ask you to do when you showed up on your first day?
oh my
you
gosh.
know, like, were you going to go hire that person who did that report for you for the interview, or like, what
So
is
the
going
person you
on?
hired somebody?
I think they hired somebody to build the report for them because they couldn't actually build the report when we hired them. Right. And this is a very basic skill. It's like entering data from a thing into a slide deck. So I think, and another thing that I always like to say is you got to fire quickly, right? If you made a bad decision and you see this, like, look, if you're early on in your business, you do not have the luxury to give people the benefit of the doubt. I've done that before and I've had to stick my foot in my mouth multiple times because of it, right? And this time it's not your foot in your mouth; it's like money going out your bank account, right? That you probably need at that moment. So I think if you do make a bad decision, and most of the time in the beginning when we haven't done this before, we're going to make bad decisions on hiring, right? Actually that's a really good insight that you had is like she's a really nice person, but she doesn't have a calming energy. And I think that nuance, like understanding I'm looking for someone with calming energy that has these skill sets is actually the nuance that allows you to find that right person, right? Because you find the right person, it makes your life amazing. You find the wrong person, your life is effing miserable, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about marketing. And so I you mentioned last time that a lot of times families don't even realize they need postpartum support until they're like right in the thick of it or after the fact, right?
Mhm.
And so, how did you see yourself initially marketing a service or a product that where you saw the need as critical, but you had to sort of convince other people that that need was critical as well, right? What were your sort of first steps to doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was lucky because in pop culture, there were new moms who were starting to talk about how difficult it was.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of talk about, okay, you can't, or we can't, as a society, expect moms to bounce back because what they're going through is pretty difficult. And so we were already having that conversation. And luckily, there was a big company that made a splash out of New York who was just killing it marketing wise. They were doing
Mm.
nearly the same thing that we were, but just in a different market. And so we kind of rode along on their coattails. And a lot of times when moms would come to us as potential clients, they had already heard of the place in New York. And they were like, oh my gosh, I was so excited to learn that there was a place in the DC area, in Virginia and in Maryland. And so they came to us looking for a service like ours. But yeah, I mean, initially it took a bit of education, and I think the biggest educational hurdle was not necessarily to convince the moms, but to convince investors, who are
Wow.
obviously notorious in looking for traction and, not parting with their money, at least after the big VC boom. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, clients came easier than investors.
Yeah. And at the time, I'm assuming you needed investors, right? Yeah. At least in the beginning period where cash is always tight and you need to spend more than anywhere near that you have, right? Um, so that's another interesting point. And I think a lot of times people are like, I got to be the first to the market. I got to move first. There's a lot of anxiety. Like, I got to launch, I got to launch, I got to launch. Sometimes there's a benefit to being a second mover or third mover, especially in a very new category where the initial person or brand that went into that market kind of did the trailblazing. You know, you know, I'm sure this other company, I think I know you're talking about this other company, they probably tried a lot of things that didn't work, right? And quote unquote wasted money on marketing or brand, which potentially exposed or opened up the market for you. And Julia, I remember like just before we started working together on some of the website stuff and some of the positioning stuff and whatnot, there were a lot of like big articles out there, in the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post. You were on the Day Show to, like both local TV, national TV, right? And so, um, where do you like? Did you see a benefit from that kind of traditional kind of PR? How did it help, and or did it not help? And how do you know it did something for you if it did anything?
Yeah. So initially, I really wasn't quite sure. Um,
Mm,
PR is one of those areas in which, when you don't have money, the money going out for PR just seems like such a huge outlay, and it is.
it
It's
is.
it's
Yeah.
not like marketing necessarily where you see the ROI. But looking back, the PR that we paid for was extremely important. And to be clear, we paid for a PR agency, and we
Uh-huh.
never ever went for any kind of paid spots. So all the articles that were written and all the media attention, that was all earned.
Yep.
Um, but yeah,
And
at
that's
the
a
time, I
term
wasn't
for
sure.
everyone out there. Earned media is when you you get it because of a relationship. You get it, it's not like you're buying a radio ad or like a print ad in a magazine, right? Like they want to run an article on you because it's interesting to their audience and you're getting awareness because of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, looking back, I think it really did help in terms
Cool.
of building credibility, especially when you're in a new category. If you're a new business, you want to build credibility. So that was definitely helpful. And there were a few pieces in which people were consistently saying, hey, I saw you in this article.
Yep.
It's been over a year since those pieces came out, so we don't see that quite as much these days, but
Sure.
definitely helpful.
Um, the other question I have for you is, the experience that you provide, runs at about $800 to $900 a night. And, like, actually and maybe I was a little out of touch, but I was like, that's in general what you would pay for like a suite at like a pretty nice hotel, you know what I mean? Without any services or amenities, right? Like $500 to $800 a night. Um, and so, initially, like we were trying to we thought that the price point might have potentially been an issue, right? But the key is that we didn't want to lower, like you never want to lower the price point, right? Like you're just end up in a race to zero. So what we tried to do was to try to figure out how do we stack the value of this to show that it's more than $800 or $900 a night. Um, it might have been effective to some extent, not effective to, to others, but did you find that you had to do a lot of convincing of folks when you got a lead, like a legitimate lead, like why it was $800 a night, or did they not even really ask any questions about that?
Well, all of the leads that we get, they're very curious buyers. So
Curious buyers. Interesting.
yes,
Okay.
they're not
Mm.
typically the type of, and we still get the emotional buyer who comes in and without having a consultation or a tour, they still purchase or reserve a stay. So we still
Yep.
get those, but not really that often. They want to come in, they want a tour. And so they may not say straight up, oh, what am I getting for this price? But they do want to know. And I think when they come in and they get the full, consultative call or what have you, they definitely appreciate everything that's being included in the stay. So it makes sense to them. And you either have the money to invest in your postpartum care or you don't. Um, so yeah.
Basically, yeah. I mean, yeah. Let me. Did you ever? I guess when you were, as you were looking at like packaging everything together, um, did you ever consider um, not putting pricing on the website and then like forcing them to do a consultation with you to go over things? Did you ever, I know you tested kind of like multiple paths and funnels and things like that, but did you ever consider not including the pricing to maybe try to drive more of that inquiry,
Yeah.
right?
I didn't. I didn't even really consider that path just because my own personal experience is that if there isn't pricing, then it's not for me.
Hmm.
To be fair, those are like Van Cleef and Arpels necklaces and, you know,
Sure.
things that are way out of my price point.
Yeah.
But I just thought I don't want to come off as that. And in the early days, we
Yep.
really did position ourselves as luxury. And that is because there was so much talk, especially in media, about the pricing. I think, folks could just not wrap their head around breaking down what you're getting for the price per stay per night.
Yeah.
Um, and so every news article mentioned the luxury of it, but we're really trying
Yeah.
to move away from that and talk about how necessary this is and what a great value it is. And if you see all the things that you're getting for the price, it's really quite a great value. So we're moving away from that. But we just didn't want to be in that category of, oof, they're so expensive. They don't even put their pricing on there. And
Yeah.
anytime we give consultations, I always tell people, I want you to go into this with all the information you need. We're very transparent and we may not be the right ones for you, or we may be the perfect fit for you. And either way, we're here to answer your questions. And it's so important to be very transparent for us.
Yeah, I have this pricing. The reason I asked you is that I have this pricing discussion inevitably with every client that I have, every prospective client that doesn't become a client, right? They always ask me about pricing, and I engage into a lot of like healthcare entrepreneur communities where they talk a lot. This is the hot topic. And there's two trains of thought, right? Like one is put it on there, disclose it, make it clear if they're right, if it's in their price range and you have the right service, they'll book with you, right? That's where you're coming from, right? The other school of thought is, well, I need to convince them. Like, well, if I can get anybody on the phone, I can convince them to buy my service. And I always say, like, that's great if you're playing not to win. But if you're playing to win, you're going to be way too effing busy, right? To be able to take those types of appointments, right? And so the key is that if you put the pricing up there, you're going to reduce the number of calls potentially from leads, but you're also going to reduce the number of unqualified calls. And when you're starting your thing out, like you're way too busy to deal with you'll drop anything you can do for a qualified person. But if it was if it was someone like, oh yeah, tell me about it, I love it. How much does it cost? Oh, it's 900. Oh, no way. You're crazy. Goodbye. that sinking feeling you have, "Well, I just wasted that much time," and then you've lost that lead, even though they weren't really a lead. I think you can avoid all of that by putting pricing on your website, right? And to your point, like you said earlier, like either you can afford it or you can't, right? And there's no need to play these like sales games and thinking that you're this awesome salesperson. Where if someone didn't have a budget for $900 a night, it doesn't matter how good of a salesperson you are, ain't working, right?
Exactly.
So don't be afraid to put your pricing on your page, right? In fact, if anything, that's what Google wants. Google wants to see pricing. Julie, I just found out we got our first AI lead today from ChatGPT. I had just before I talked with you. A clinic reached out to me. I took a call with them. I said, "How'd you find out about us?" They said they searched, tell me the top marketing agencies in Utah, and somehow we showed up, right? And so, like, you're starting to see like a lot of these kind of things like start to happen. And when you think about marketing, like investing in these kind of things, like it can be very, I think, tricky for the entrepreneur to know where to put their mind and their money, right? And so I think when you look at what you've done and you look at like kind of where you focused your time, where you've invested it, and the extra stuff that you got from that, I think that could be a good lesson to a lot of the folks out there who have no idea what they're doing when it comes to marketing or know where to invest. Um, so I think the going back to what we were talking about with press, um, did you do anything with that press to kind of extend the life of it? Did you create social content out of it? Did you use it in any of your sales pitches or like your tours or anything like that?
Thinking back, I think we could have done a lot more with it, and I think we still can, but we included links to our biggest pieces in any of our marketing content, email marketing content. So it continues to live on there. You guys helped us produce a bunch of social media content around it. We even have it. I guess it's called the hero section or, at the top
Hmm.
of our website.
Yeah,
And, I look at that once in a while and I'm horrified because, who likes to see a big picture of
themselves.
themselves somewhere like that? But, we're still using that content to this day. And,
Good.
in the future, what we're trying to do is build a news page, backlinking, and all those things that help to draw more or a bigger audience to your website and the best places to get information about you. I think it's so important. So I guess that's
Cool.
one thumbs up for PR to help
Yeah.
you get the content to use in that way.
I think the PR, I've come across a lot of PR agencies, and I think the PR agency you hired did a great job. I think, obviously, I think you had a good story to tell that helps the PR agency, obviously. But I think they did a great job with what they were able to accomplish for you, both nationally and I think locally. And I know it wasn't cheap, right? But like you said, kind of in hindsight, yeah, I think it was worth it, to get us like off the ground and get us that legitimacy. Just a couple more questions as we wrap up here. And I kind of wanted to zoom back out again and um, get back to this kind of journey of pivoting from, you know, lawmaking, politics into entrepreneurship in the healthcare industry. And I'm actually talking to a lot of our potential listeners who they might be making a pivot from like maybe one career to a very different type of career, like in the same industry. Now you moved into completely different industries, right? But I think capital is always a problem, right? When you want to get started, because it's the catch 22. And you hear all the statistics, all the Jeff Bezos and Elon and all those people who made it, their parents gave them their seed money. You know what I mean? So and for all of us my parents gave me my seed money to start my company as well, right? I certainly had to take loans and things like that on my own. But like, how did you approach securing capital? Because I think a lot of times, if you're not an entrepreneur, you're kind of ashamed to ask for money, right? It's an embarrassing thing. You don't know how to do it. And it's a very weird thing that you're not really trained to do in business school or not, right? So how did you approach securing that first kind of bunch of capital? Did you self-fund yourself to start with, right? And how did you kind of come to that decision?
Yeah. So in the beginning, I used my own savings, which admittedly was not that much.
Yeah,
But that's what paid for our attorneys and the branding. And very quickly, we realized that, oh, we need a lot more capital, like in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions.
yeah,
Um, and so I actually did a friends and family round. I did pitch
yep,
to my parents and my in-laws and friends and family, and that made up the bulk of our
nice.
seed capital.
Let
And
me
then
ask
from yeah,
real quick. How did you pitch to them? Did you treat them like actual investors? Did you have legitimate documents, right? Not just like a promissory note on the back of a napkin. Like, how did you pitch them? What was your mindset in sort of pitching them?
yeah, I took it very seriously. I had a whole pitch deck and
Yeah.
I went in there. I mean, the hardest thing was asking for the meeting in the first place.
Mhm.
But those are more often than not, those are the yeses because you're really approaching people who you're pretty sure they have the capital to invest. You're not asking your broke neighbor next door, right? You're asking folks who have the capital.
Yep.
And so I took it very seriously. But surprisingly, some of them were like, "Oh, can you just like print out your slides and give them to me?" Very few of them actually wanted
Yep.
the professional A to Z pitch.
Yeah.
They're like, "Oh yeah, yeah, just tell me about it." And I think if you're close enough to them, they've been hearing about what you've been doing during
Yeah.
your building phase. And so they kind of have an idea already. But we provided very professional legal documents when they signed on the dotted
Yep.
line and they gave us their money. We made sure that we would be good stewards of their money and that it's not just disappearing into a black hole. They
Did you
say
provide
they
a
signed.
personal guarantee against it? Because they signed it as they initially signed as like debt, basically, to come in, right?
Well, most of them signed a SAFE agreement.
Like a safe note. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we did guarantee it, but
Yeah.
not formally. And so,
Yep.
except for one um friend of ours, actually two friends of ours, we said, listen, you guys are not family, and this is, pretty big chunk of change. And so if something goes under, we'll be sure to pay you back. And I think that goes for all of our investors.
Yep.
We didn't put it in writing, but I think there's an understanding that we will pay them back.
Yeah. No, and when I had to, raise friends and family stuff on my own. And again, it wasn't lots of money. It was tens of thousands, maybe a couple $100,000. So it wasn't tons of money, but um, I always said that if we went under, like I would be good for it. And I think that's something that if you're gonna put yourself like any bank would require a personal guarantee, and so like you probably want to provide that to the friends and family you're going to. Um, I think another piece of advice to folks, and this is my own experience, just trying to get that $10,000 check or that this smallish checks, right, to try and get the initial piece of capital. Um, I my personality is like I like to be transparent and disclose things, and because I did that, I don't think I sold the dream enough. I was like trying to explain to them what the risks were and how we're mitigating them as opposed to selling them like we're building this amazing thing. And I think that is not your job when you're raising money. That's the investor's job to ask the questions about what the risks are. It's not your job to point those out. You should be aware, like in every deck, you're always aware of the market pressures and the external things that you could sink your idea, right? But outside of those big picture things, you don't really you need to sell the dream and what the future of it is going to look like, as opposed to like trying to be too careful. And that was something that it took me a long time to like get my head around because I was trying to be like responsible. You know what I mean? But it only made people more skeptical of the idea when you start bringing those things up.
Yeah.
So it's a fine line you have to cross, which is why it's always weird to ask for money from friends and family, but you almost have to get started. you
Yeah,
know?
I mean, when you're going for non-friends and family investor money, I mean, not only do you have to sell the dream first and foremost, but they do ask about, well, how is this investment de-risked? Like,
Yep.
what are all the things, right? So they do ask those questions,
Sure.
but I mean, a part of me thinks that they're a little bit harder on you when you're a woman. They're harder on you when it's a completely new industry.
For
And
sure.
it's definitely, those questions are up for grabs when you're not dealing with friends and family who really know you and trust you. So, these
100%.
investors, they don't know you. They have no reason to trust you. So,
Yeah, and they have a very standard list of questions they ask every single person they're gonna speak to, you know? And that's the other thing, when you talk to those professional investors, never take anything, like, personally. That's, like, the most important thing, I think, when you're dealing with asking for money, dealing with money. You cannot take anything personally, because it ends up creating this weird attitude in you, and, the worst thing for an investor is being like, "This person doesn't understand how to be a steward of my money," right? And, like, they're only looking at things in a very myopic view.
yeah.
Um,
To be fair, I've never talked to a professional investor or like an assistant of theirs who was ever a jerk. I think they
cool.
know that they
Yeah.
have your hopes and dreams in their hands. And so,
Yeah.
by and large, they always try to step forward with kindness. So, if you
Yeah.
ever are in a meeting with an investor or representative of that investor and that person is a jerk, you don't want to be taking their money anyway.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, and frankly, remember, capital is a commodity. Right? Those guys have to work hard to find the best deals, because for the good companies that are out there or the ones that are trending, right? Like, a lot of times, they're fighting for those deals, and so they have to put a good first foot forward because they never know what company could be that deal. But actually, Julie, double click on the being a woman thing. Like, what did you feel like you were mainly pitching men? Obviously we know all the statistics about investment management and sort of how it's skewed, gender wise, but like what did you pick up from those calls? Like, do they not understand what it is to be a pregnant woman, right? And they're asking kind of these ignorant questions about those things. Like, what did you gather from that made it difficult for you as women? Because I'm sure there's a lot of other women out there who are feeling the same thing and don't want to feel crazy that they're feeling this way. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is that 98% of the investors who I pitched were men. And if I were going to pitch to a man, then I wanted to be sure I was pitching to someone who was married or has children of his own.
Sure. Of
So there's
course.
that
Yeah.
experience because when they see what their wives or partners go through, I mean, you can't unsee that. It's hard. But yeah, I mean, in the early days, I pitched to a really nice older gentleman who was like, oh my gosh, that makes me feel really bad for what my mom went through. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if you're saying that, then you are so far removed from
Hmm.
this issue that you're never going to get it. But I do
Yeah.
think that investors style themselves to be, or at least they try to be really in tune with the zeitgeist or whatever is the biggest problem of the day, because that's their job, right? Is they're trying to invest their money or, their clients' money into a business that's solving a real world problem in a way that hasn't been approached before. And so they really do try to be at the forefront of what are the real problems today. Um, but if there isn't a personal connection, um, it's hard, especially with something like motherhood. I guess it's an issue with any kind of problem. If you don't have a personal
Sure.
connection, you don't fully understand it, even if intellectually you're like, oh, yeah, that's definitely a problem that needs solving.
So let's just end with this question, right? Or this topic, which is this idea of the motherhood penalty, right? And I think your business, in addition to just being a, a real business, makes profit, generates revenue, has a structure and all that stuff. Um, it seems like your business is also kind of an advocate for like social and maybe even cultural change, in America or North America. And I guess where do you see Sanu's mission in being kind of like and these things may have nothing to do with unit economics or anything like that, but in pushing forward like this kind of culture of care for mothers and for caregivers, and these like really important parts when, when a baby is born. Like, where do you see Sanu fitting into this? Do you see it as being a part of kind of like what keeps you going and dealing with all this BS? Is it a central part to the mission, you think, moving forward?
Oh, absolutely. I
Okay.
mean, the statistics prove out that the motherhood penalty is real. And so, you do see a drop in income and a drop in opportunities and women falling out of the workplace once they have babies. Whereas for men, it's the opposite. They're getting more opportunities, their income is only going up. And so the motherhood penalty is real. But what Sani does is kind of double edged. So, yes, we are trying to bring more awareness and normalize taking the time to care for yourself and, in turn, your entire family once you have a baby. But also, we're working with where society is today. And so, we're saying to all of those type A moms who, for very good reasons, have bought into or really believe that they can do it all. And they're these executive moms and go getters, type A's, um, that if you do postpartum right, it will reduce the motherhood penalty for you. You'll have to drop out of the workplace less. You'll have to take fewer appointments. You'll feel better. You'll do better. And in turn, your family will be better for it. And so, we're kind of riding on both sides of the line.
No, I mean, I love that message, right? And I mean, like we talked about last time, if you can find ways to quantify that, right, or find data that we can really, and that's tough, right? Obviously, there's a lot of sort of both qualitative and quantitative things that you can kind of measure here, right? But I take this more in line of like the current administration and them wanting, Americans to have more kids and things like that. Well, if you want that, you know, fund Sanu, right? Like provide some sort of carve out, in the federal budget, right? And I actually said like I've always thought that like of all the challenges we're having in our country right now with, our youth, with us fighting with each other and whatnot, like childcare is actually, I think, one of the root issues of socioeconomic, like it affects everybody. It doesn't matter your socioeconomic status. Childcare is something that everybody has to be concerned with, right? And frankly, our country needs to be concerned with it because the mental health of our kids is falling, all those kind of things, right? And so if this administration is really focused on trying to drive the family unit and push a lot of these sort of family values, you also have to think about the care for the mother, right? That might be a little bit different from what we're traditionally used to, right? And that to me is where when we're looking in, and again, I got into healthcare models because I love looking at these alternative sort of modalities to healthcare that are outside of the traditional GP, physician, you know what I mean? Like the traditional kind of like medicine system, because like what you're doing, it exposes us to say, hey, there's a different ways to go about doing this, and you don't have to suffer, and we don't have to deal with the stereotypes and cliches, right? So yeah, the administration like put some dollars to this. This is a great way for us to encourage people to have families and have strong families and be able to start off with the right foundation, right? Because in a lot of ways, that's what you're building. You're building a foundation for them to be successful as parents, right?
Yeah, and the evidence is there that if you look at all the countries where the birth rates are dropping, they tend to be in countries where you don't have that community, where raising a kid is the mom and dad alone and they're isolated. And that's how the US is, that's how Korea is, that's how Japan is. Um, Whereas if you look at communities, like communities in Alaska,
Yep.
communities in Central and South America, where it's a lot more of a neighborhood or larger families that are coming together in the care of everyone, the load is spread across multiple individuals, and you're just having a much easier time at things that you feel as though you can have two, three, four kids without being a millionaire. And so, put your money where your mouth is, right? Like if you want your people to have these abundant families,
Yep.
then we have to bring the community back into it and be more open as a society.
100%. Yeah, and I think that's a great way to end it, and I think the main takeaway here is that like there's with where we are with the internet, technology, like changing cultural and behavioral attitudes towards things, like there's a lot of alternative modalities that people are interested in now. And, someone like you, Julia, who's bringing these to the forefront, if you're one of those entrepreneurs who's doing it, it's a tricky, tricky proposition because you got to create demand for like a new service it's obviously clear what the benefit is, at least on the surface, but there's a process and there's a long way to go to being able to really build a business out of that, right? And Julia, when did you start this again?
2024, January 2nd is when we opened our doors. It took 2.5 years of
Yeah.
development before that. So a long
Yeah.
time.
I mean, that's a typical thing, right? And a couple of years before you even saw some revenue, right? Some legitimate revenue. So, if you're doing something new in a new space, and look, there's a lot of regenerative medicine clinics out there that are trying new things and trying to bring these new modalities to the table. You may not see success right away, right? But you've got to build that sort of funnel. You got to build the demand. You got to be patient, and just you got to keep the doors open, and you got to just keep optimizing and find the ways like Julia has. So Julia, thanks so much for joining me on these last two episodes. It's really good to talk to you about this. You can learn more about Sanu and Julia at sanupostpartumcare.com and on their socials at Sanu Postpartum Care. If you're a healthcare or wellness entrepreneur ready to grow smarter, we're here to help. We specialize in building foundational marketing assets from professional websites and local SEO to paid ads and HIPAA-compliant CRM technology. To get a personalized assessment of your business, head over to tobyagency.co. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks for joining us, Julia.